Everybody is dealing with something. And that's really why I want to share these stories, because the more stories we tell, the more people can relate to them and hopefully we can help, get through their own struggle.
Brains of children who were abused are vastly different in an MRI scan as an adult than brains of someone who wasn't.
Okay, guys, so welcome to Tattoos of My Soul podcast. Today, our guest is Kelly Gunter, and she is the author of the Amazon #1 seller, You Have Such a Pretty Face. It's a memoir of trauma, hope, and the joy that follows survival. She has an amazing story that we're going to hear all about today. She is also a speaker, a life coach. She's a social worker of 28 years and has degrees in sociology and counseling. And she's currently pursuing her doctoral degree in counseling and traumatology. And if she was not busy enough, she also spends her nights helping people on the suicide prevention line, which is amazing. So I welcome you to the show, and I am so glad that you're here. And it's finally nice to get to talk to you, because we've been trying to touch base and sit down for a very long time. And we had a date to have coffee today, and I said, hey, why don't we just do a podcast? And she was like, okay, so
Sure.
That's what we're doing.
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
I love what you're doing with the Tattoos of My Soul. It just spoke to me on such a deep level because I can relate.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm just happy to share my story and everything God's done in my life, through the darkness, through the light, through the most difficult times.
Yeah. That's what we talk about here at Tattoos. That's really what we're all about is finding faith in deep waters and changing our perspective on adversity, because everybody's going through something. Everybody's a survivor of something. So it's all about changing the perspective and getting a God perspective. I know you can relate. That's the only thing that's gotten me through the difficult times. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. For me, I wasn't raised in a Christian home. But I had an amazing neighbor who got me my first Bible. And so God was sort of sprinkled in and out of my life. I had always loved him. I had always prayed. But he certainly was more of a peripheral place in my life.
Yeah.
He wasn't the main thing. And so ultimately, going through so much trauma in my childhood, and then addiction after addiction after addiction, just running from that pain. And eventually all of that self-destruction culminating into just the complete collapse of my life. And I went into treatment. And so it was then that I lost every single person I loved, everything I'd worked hard to obtain. And when you're just surrounded in darkness, and you have no one, you have to learn to trust in a way that you've never considered in your life.
Right.
And just when I would think, okay, I trust God 100%, something else would happen that I was like, where are you, God?
Yeah.
And so it was such a journey. And the thing is, God showed me each and every time, I will not fail you. And so after enough times, you just begin to believe it.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like I said, that was a 5-year journey, and just so much pain and so much fire, walking through his refining fire. And so I just learned that there is nothing that he's going to let happen to me that he won't be right there beside me.
Yeah, right. I mean, Jeremiah 29:11, it's one of my life verses. I've got it on my arm, but I've just gone back to it time and time again in my life for that very reason, because every time something happens that you question, it's like, well, wait, this is part of God's plan. And he promised that it was for something good. So I can trust in this, even if I can't see the light right now, like I know he's still with me.
Right.
So that I can totally relate to that, and I love that. So you're speaking about your pain, and obviously, I want to hold up your book because you just brought this into me. I'm super excited to read it, but it's a memoir of trauma. Can you speak to some of what you've been through? I know you have been through a lot.
Mhm.
So just share as much as you'd like to about that.
Yeah. So as a child, I was sexually abused in my home,
Hmm.
starting roughly about the age of 7. My
Yeah.
memories are a little bit kind of cloudy as
Hmm.
to exactly what age. But it went on until I was 14. And so I was raped and molested in my home by
Mm.
my older teenage brothers. And it was just a pain I couldn't escape. And, people are quick to ask victims, why didn't you tell?
Hmm.
And I did try to tell once. And apparently, as a little girl, I didn't use the words that adequately conveyed what was being done to me.
Hmm.
And so something was said to someone because I was raped again very soon after.
Mm.
The threats were up to notch. The violence and the brutality of it was worse. And what I learned from that was just, I'll never tell anyone again.
Yeah.
So the shame of that abuse just engulfed me all of my life.
Hmm.
And so as I was growing and developing, and my brain is growing and developing, brains of children who were abused are vastly different in an MRI scan as an adult
Mm.
than brains of someone who wasn't.
Yeah.
And the areas that are affected are the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And so those are the areas that affect judgment and consequential thinking and the fight, flight, or freeze response, all of those things. And the good news is that those areas can be reconfigured.
Hmm.
But we can't heal what we don't feel,
Yeah.
and we can't heal what we don't acknowledge. And so, what I learned to be was just an incredibly good secret keeper.
Mm.
And so, I learned to hide from the world what was happening to me.
Hmm.
So, when we have those survival skills as a child, once we go into adulthood, we don't suddenly realize, I don't need these anymore.
Right. Yeah.
And so that pain was just something that gripped me. And I had such insane low self worth.
Yeah.
And, typically people who are abused by people in their own home don't hate their abusers, they hate themselves.
Mm.
And, there's this identification with the aggressor where you learn to absorb the guilt of what's going on. You blame yourself because if you, as a child, look at your abuser and you can say, this is all their fault and I'm
Mhm.
not at fault here,
Mhm.
you have no hope of changing it. So,
Mm.
as a victim and as a child, if you can say, well, if I do this, then maybe it'll stop, it
Yeah.
gives you hope. Even though it isn't valid hope, it's
Mhm.
a survival skill.
Yeah.
And so, how did I comfort myself? I used food initially. And that's what the You Have Such a Pretty Face is about, because I eventually weighed 400 pounds.
Wow.
And people would say to me all the time, oh, Kelley is just such a shame. You have such a pretty face.
Mm.
As if that's a compliment, which
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
isn't.
Right.
And that's why I named the book that,
Mhm.
because I knew people who had struggled with their weight would recognize that title immediately.
Mhm.
So eventually, about after I'd weighed that much for almost 20 years, I had weight loss surgery. I lost 243 pounds. And so I've kept that off now for 19 years.
Wow.
But the issue was I didn't deal with the pain of the
Mhm.
trauma that had caused me to use food as comfort.
Mhm.
So then I developed cross addiction after cross addiction after
Mhm.
cross addiction. And so that's what the book is about. The book does cover my weight loss, But the book is about, okay, food was my Band-Aid. So I ripped off that Band-Aid and I couldn't overeat after surgery. So I had to get a new Band-Aid because my wound was still there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an amazing story. And I mean, I cannot even begin to relate to that, that is there. And it's so brave for you to speak about that because, sexual abuse in children and adults, I mean, it runs rampant. And I know that there's going to be people that listen to this podcast and they're living that right now. They're living that nightmare. And just hearing you speak to that and being vulnerable enough to say that I went through that, but I survived is such an amazing thing. So I want to thank you for being able to do that because it takes a ton of strength,
Yeah. Well, thank you, because I think it's important for anybody who is listening, who is currently being abused or who was abused and has never spoken about that trauma, that you are more than anything that was ever done to you.
Yeah.
And, it's an incredibly complex situation to grow up with someone who rapes you at night and you have breakfast with them in the morning.
Right.
I mean, how many rape victims have to have breakfast or dinner with the person who raped them the day before?
Right.
And I mean, how many rape victims have to hand their rapist a Christmas present? But that is the complexity of children who are abused in their own home.
Yeah.
And so you grow up with this really distorted picture of what love is.
Right.
And, people who love me hurt me.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I have to forgive them. Yeah.
I listened to a sermon you did this morning, which was amazing. But I loved how we've all heard Jesus leaves the 99 to find the one, and you said that sounds crazy until you actually become the one. So what exactly did you mean by that?
Yeah, because I just was so lost at one point. And so struggling. And then when I lost everything, I had no one. It was my son and I. We lost our home. We lost our cars, our belongings, everything we had. We had nothing and we had no one. And so there we were, just kind of trying to make it. And, even our church turned their back on us and didn't want anything to do, didn't want to help us. In fact, there was a person who actually was very instrumental from our church who wrote really nasty letters and different things. And so there we were, just kind of on our own.
Yeah.
And but God came running after us. He didn't sit idly by and wait on me to think I should talk to God about this. I mean, I felt like he pursued me.
Yeah.
And I felt like all of the time when I would be in my darkest moments, I would just hear his voice in my mind saying, focus on me. Healing from that kind of trauma, there are constant night terrors and flashbacks and intrusive thoughts. And eventually, with the right coping mechanisms, you can learn to extinguish a lot of those. But in the beginning, it really is so difficult. And in the middle of that, in the middle of the constant night terrors, I just would hear him saying, focus on me, And so he just relentlessly pursued me.
I love that.
Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by Revive Events. So Tattoos of My Soul is so much more than a podcast. It is partner companies with All In Nutritionals, which is my husband Lindsay Duncan's company, and also Revive Events. It is the company that hosts amazing, life-changing, motivational, uplifting events. These events are the places where we tell stories of tragedy yet triumph. It's where we educate people on the strategies that we've used through our own healing journey. You see, my husband, Lindsay, and I, we went through our own personal trauma. In February of 2020, we were almost shot and killed in our driveway. Now, obviously, when you go through something like this, you go through darkness. And we went through our dark time, no doubt, but we chose not to stay there. And as we were coming out of that darkness and as we were working through our healing process, we realized God left us here for a reason. We have work to do. We have work to do in the area of helping people. And so these 3 companies were born out of something that was meant for harm, but we decided to turn it for good. So if you come to a Revive event, you can count on being uplifted, motivated, and inspired by true real-life stories of, like I said, tragedy, yet triumph. We want to educate you on the things that we've used in our own healing journey that we believe in so much that we can't not share them. So you got to get your tickets today. We have an event in Springfield, Ohio at the historic Bushnell building, which is on August 14th. And then we also have a second event in Kansas City, Missouri on October 15th and 16th. So wherever you're closest to, get your event. You do not want to miss this. Bring anybody that you know who wants to be connected and feel elevated, because you will walk away with tangible, life-changing practices, and you will have what Revive is about, the ultimate paradigm shift. I know you went through an intense healing journey, you know, and I'm guessing, I'm just going to assume, but I'm probably correct on this one, that if you had a lot of people like turning their backs on you at your church, you know, I'm assuming that God brought in new people into your life that were the exact opposite and that really helped you in your healing journey. So I heard a little bit about, you know, what you did this morning when I listened to your sermon, but I would love for you to share, you know, what did that healing journey look like for you and just kind of that process?
Yeah, specifically, do you mean my treatment or what specifically?
Just, you know, I know that there was a time where you spoke about the hit rock bottom, you know, you wanted to die even, you know, and that's definitely a place of desperation, you know?
Yeah.
And so how did you get from that place to deciding, hey, I'm going to do the work. I'm going to heal myself.
Yeah.
You know, what did that look like?
Well, there was definitely a time that I thought I would be worth more to my son dead, because I thought that the life insurance would be more for him than me being in his life. I felt like I had just destroyed everything. And so many times I thought of suicide, but I just couldn't bring myself to actually do it.
Yeah.
And my next book that's coming out, I actually talk about this story that I actually tried to hire someone to kill me because, because I knew I couldn't do it. Yeah. So, you know, that's a whole chapter in the next book.
Yeah.
And a scary, scary place that I had myself in. And so finally, at one point, I heard a person speaking on YouTube, and they were saying that they'd had nights when they were sitting in those same chairs, and they were at a church, and they said, and I didn't think I'd live through the night. So I was like, oh, let me get my tablet and my pen. Let me really take some notes.
Right.
And so hearing their story, I just was kind of disappointed, because I thought, oh, that person did nothing wrong. That person, you know, I felt like some of what they went through was so much less. Immediately, God sort of smacked me in the back of my head, because you can't compare pain. And that's not even fair. And so really quickly, I was like, okay, everybody's pain level is different. But what it taught me and what it told me was, on that day, that I knew there were people out there just like me, struggling and looking for any sign that there was hope that they could survive. And so I told God that day, I said, if you will get me through this, I will speak.
Mm.
And I will tell all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, the mistakes, the abuse, because I had no intention of ever sharing my story of abuse. And You Have Such a Pretty Face, I think there's maybe 4 paragraphs that talk about the abuse. And initially, it wasn't in there at all.
Mm-hmm.
And literally, I couldn't sleep at night. I thought this just isn't genuine.
Mm-hmm.
And but I wasn't really ready to speak about it.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I wrote the book, I had no intention of speaking.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, hey, I'm going to write books. I'm going to cower in the corner and just live my life this way. And so ultimately, I mean, in the past, and this is so illustrative of God's amazing love and strength, I would never public speak. I was terrified of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so after the first time someone had me speak, it's like my soul was just on fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to God that day, if you will get me through this, I will speak.
Yeah.
Because he gets the glory. That's the one thing I know is what has happened to me, what has transpired, my mistakes, the people who abused me, whatever, all of it is kind of neatly wrapped up into a package. Ultimately, it's about God.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about that he came after me. He let me walk an amazing healing journey. And walking through that fire, it's one of my favorite scriptures, and that's Daniel 3:18. That, the teenage boys were thrown into the furnace. And when they walked through the fire, A, Jesus was with them.
Mm-hmm.
But B, when they came out, the only thing burned in the fire were the ties that bound them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's difficult to walk through God's refining fire.
Mm-hmm.
And, but ultimately doing that got me into the best place I've ever been in my life.
Yeah.
And so, healing, I always say, like, here's healing and here's peace. But I've got that backwards. Here's your pain.
Mm-hmm.
Here's your peace. The bridge that connects the two is healing.
Yeah.
And you just have to be willing to go through the healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not pretty. People think healing is singing Kumbaya,
Right.
but it
Yeah.
isn't.
Right.
It's like digging into those places that you don't talk about at cocktail parties,
Yes.
and it's painful. And there's a lot of ugly crying and,
Exactly.
there just is.
Yeah.
And people see the final result and they think, oh, I want to heal. But they didn't see the nights curled up in the fetal position, just praying to God to stop the pain.
Right.
Right. It's incredibly difficult when you fall asleep at night crying, you wake up in the middle of the night crying, and you wake up in the morning crying.
Yeah.
That's a hard place to exist
It is.
in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I love also what you say, because we're talking about pain. Okay. So, you've got your pain of sexual abuse, and I've got my pain of the trauma that we went through. And people out there that are listening are all going to have their pain issues. Everybody's got it. And what you say is we all live in a house of pain, but we live in different rooms.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what Tattoos of My Soul is about, because it's really identifying with the fact that as we go through life, we are all getting tattooed, scarred, whatever you want to call it. But I think the silver lining is using that in a way that helps you grow and ultimately serve others, which is exactly what you're doing. It's easier not to talk about the pain, not to talk about what you've been through. I know I went through a time where I didn't want to talk about anything that we had been through. I was frankly embarrassed by it because I thought people must look at me and think your life is a mess. Like, look at what happened. It's crazy. But God did the same thing with me. It's like, you need to tell your story, because by not telling your story, you're not giving me any credit, basically. I mean, look what I saved you from, and it's the same thing with you. So I love being able to share these stories, because I hope it's an encouragement to other people who are listening, whatever they're going through. Not that they have to get on a podcast or they have to
Yeah.
have a Facebook group or whatever. Everybody's called to their certain thing, but it's basically just about serving humanity in whatever way you're called to do.
Yeah.
Being that loving, kind, comforting person, empathetic. I feel, and I wonder if you could speak to this as well. I am so much more empathetic now, and I feel like I really understand pain on a different level because I have been through a painful experience. It's hard to understand that if you haven't been through a painful experience. And here's the fact, everybody has been, but we just need to focus on that empathy for others, that love for others.
Right, 100%. And, God will strip us down to nothing.
Yeah.
And in doing that, you become one of two types of people. You either develop empathy or you become this angry, bitter person.
Correct.
And for me, everything I went through, everything that was lost, all of the people, all of the things I thought were so important. And then ultimately, God brought new people.
Yeah.
He brought people who embraced me, people who helped me, people who really modeled for me what, in my opinion, a real Christian is.
Yeah.
And they loved me at my worst. They celebrated me at my best. There were countless times they got hysterical phone calls at 4 a.m. There were many times that they were worried that I was going to end my life. And their constant love and faith, when I would say, how can God let all of this keep happening?
Yeah.
They didn't try to quote something that would explain it. They just said, I don't know. And I'm praying for you, and I'm praying with you, and I won't abandon you.
Yeah.
I'm going to be beside you. And that was real to me. And, ultimately, I just was able to learn whatever it is, God will work it for good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever it is. And
love
people like to hear that, but people don't like to experience the ashes. Yeah. And some people think, that some people never have to experience that. And amen for them, but that wasn't my journey. And God was with me, even in all of the rapes and even through the abuse, even through the mistakes. He was never away from me.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, that's easy to see, but it just makes me so thankful that we're not praising and worshiping a God who relies on hindsight,
Right.
because he knows what we need.
Exactly.
And if we just can hand it to him, and that's what I did. I just placed all of my broken dreams, my broken life, everything at his feet.
Yeah.
And just surrendered.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true surrender is like, I don't know. I never really understood what that felt like. And I think honestly, we're never done surrendering.
Right.
We've never got everything figured out. Like this life is about learning and evolving and growing. And no doubt, we're going to go through the valleys. There's seasons of life where things are going to be more difficult. And then there's seasons of life that are going to be, blessings and joy. Right. But it's really about continuing to learn, continuing to surrender through each situation and trying to figure out, like, okay, God, like, how can I ultimately grow closer to you through this situation? So I think that's so great. Was there ever a time that you thought you needed to get yourself all figured out before you could start helping people?
Yes.
Yes.
For sure. I thought, I have to do this, and this. I have to accomplish this before I can speak. Or I have to be able to be at this place before I can speak. And what I really learned is that people are inspired and motivated by the scars.
Yeah.
They're motivated by mistakes. They're motivated by seeing someone who maybe had it a little worse than them, but made it through.
Yeah.
And by hearing the parts that we think we should hide, those broken pieces,
Right.
ultimately, that's what connects to them. Because you can line up all the experts in the world. People aren't going to be moved by that. But when they can connect to a part of your story and they can see the genuineness inside of you and the fact that you have suffered and you didn't have it figured out, but yet you're working on it and you're moving forward, that's what gives people hope.
Yeah.
And I get those messages every day on social media. You know, I made a post a couple of days ago about just, you know, the time that I wanted to end my life and everything. And I literally was inundated with messages from people who were telling me, I'm in that place right now.
Yeah.
How did you get through? And, you know, that's what it's all about, reaching those people.
Exactly. Yeah. So that leads me into my next question. Tell us a little bit about how you spend many of your evenings. And because I think that is a true calling. Not everybody can do that.
Yeah. So taking calls on the suicide hotline, for people who are in that place, you know, and I feel very strongly about that because I feel like God got me out of that darkness for a reason.
Yeah.
And what I always try to tell people is if you are in that darkness, I promise if you look around, you'll see my footprints. And if I can get out, you can get out too.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's my responsibility to shine my light to try and help light the path a little bit for somebody who's having a hard time finding hope.
Right.
And so taking those calls, it's a national hotline. So we get calls from all over and people who just really are at the most painful place they've ever been. And they're just trying to find some reason to carry on.
Yeah.
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 How long have you been doing that for?
Only 6 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing that, I mean, you're obviously just giving so much of yourself, but you know, you've got to be receiving back. That's got to be also a gift for you. You know?
And, you know, every night, of course, I pray before I log on. I pray between every call. A lot of times I pray during the call because I'm just like, God, I need you to give me the words for this one. Because 28 years of counseling and I'm in a blank, you know, because just when you think you've heard it all, you hear something that you're just overwhelmed with. How can people survive these things? And so it is a very serious position and one that, you know, the ultimate call is when people hang up and they're just like, I'm so glad that I got you.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that makes it all worth it. And of course, my heart always skips a beat when they say, could you pray with me? Yes, I will.
Is there a favorite verse that you have that you go to often? Yeah,
there is. Growing up and through high school and college and all of that, my favorite was Isaiah 22:22, which you know, God opens doors no man can close and closes doors no man can open.
Yeah.
And I love that because it just always reminded me that people have nothing to do with my destiny. That's between God and I. And if God wants a door open, no one can close it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I can pound on a door all day long, but if God doesn't want it open, it's not going to, you know, give. And there was just a point when I had to say, okay, God, I'm not pounding on any more doors. But after all of this, then the verse I talked about earlier, Daniel 3:18, and that's where the teenagers say to King Nebuchadnezzar that we believe our God can save us from this fire, but even if he doesn't, we're not going to praise your God. And I have a necklace that says even if, because God has done so many miracles in my life. I was on life support. They said, she's not going to live through the night.
Wow.
And, here I am. And just miracle after miracle after miracle. That book is packed with miracles.
Yeah.
And so even if God never gives me another miracle, if there's never another answered prayer, like I will praise him because he's done so much in my life already.
Yeah.
So that's what resonates with me today
Yeah.
is the even if.
Yeah. I love that. Well,
Yeah.
you have an amazing story, and I'm so happy that you finally came and that we finally touched base. And if people want to get more information, they can go to your website. It's kellygunter.com. I know you're on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
And again, your book, You Have Such a Pretty Face, is on Amazon. And when can we expect the second book?
Yeah. Well, first, You Have Such a Pretty Face it's on Amazon, it's on Kindle, it's on audiobooks, so it's available in every format.
Yeah.
And The Homecoming Queen of Crazy Town, which is the next book.
I love that title.
Yeah. Well, I introduced the queen in that book.
Okay.
And ultimately, the queen is about who we are when we're overwhelmed and we're stressed, and especially when we don't feel like we're enough and people step on those triggers.
Yeah.
And, so the queen was in charge of my life for many years, and healing put her into the royal chambers of my heart. So the book is all the true stories of just lunacy in my life before I healed. And so that should be on shelves by the end of October.
Wow.
So it's coming soon.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So maybe we'll have you back when the second book is out. Cool.
Yeah. And that's also my blog, Ramblings from the Homecoming Queen of Crazy Town.
Sweet.
And that's on my website.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, so good to have you.
Thank you.
You have such an amazing story, but I love how you're paying it forward. You're not letting your pain be wasted.
Yeah.
And that's only possible with God. God is an absolute master at taking what could break us and turning that around and making it stronger and letting us help others. So you're true testimony to that.
Oh, well, thank you. When I speak, I typically end with glow sticks, and I hand them out to the crowd, turn the lights off, and have everybody break them and say, it wasn't until we were broken that we could shine.
Oh, I love that.
And so I just think that's the message to everyone. God will bring out that shine.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay.